Gurren Lagann's score is incredibly well crafted, and if you like it or not, that's really up to personal taste, but I don't know if many people can argue that it isn't well crafted, from its amazing usage of genre mixing to its strong fundamentals in orchestration and overall melodic and harmonic writing. You can see the age in TTGL's score in things like instrument patches, synths, or mixing and mastering techniques, but that doesn't detract from the quality of the original music that was written. I could go on about this stuff for a long time, but today I wanted to draw attention to something that TTGL does exceptionally well in the music and the show. Hype. Particularly the blend of emotional substance and hype, because honestly, hype with no emotional payoff ends up feeling cheap and hollow. Let's take a look at how Iwasaki balances and blends these ideas masterfully in the score of Gurren Lagann. When looking at this point specifically, there isn't really a better set of pieces to look at than the With Your XXX set of pieces. This is a good set to look at for analysis because there are 3 different variations of the piece that all land on a spectrum of hype. The least traditionally hype but most emotional being With Your XXX. Different sources have different names for these pieces, so I'm going with the translation I have personally. This variation is an emotional, more broken down version of the melody, with the main focus being on the piano. The most traditionally hype, but still emotional, which we'll see in a bit, is With Your XXX Pierce the Heavens, which I'll oftentimes refer to as the Pierce the Heavens variation, because it's easier to say. Shows off a more quick beat structure and fuller orchestra sound, the main focus being on the string orchestra and brass section. The last piece in this small 3-piece group is With Your XXX The Heavens, which is a broken down version with main focus on a small string ensemble and lands more closely to the emotional side on the scale of hype. What interests me about this so much is the fact that the pieces show off how important orchestration and beat are to making a piece have hype. If you listen to the main melody itself, it's an incredibly emotional melody, but it's used to hype up the audience in the Pierce the Heavens variation because of its quick synth beat and energetic string accompaniment. I am a huge fan of this method because over time the audience gets very familiar with this melody in different contexts and it creates an emotional bond with the music. All the past experiences and feelings from each time the theme is played, be it during a hype section or an emotional one, come flooding back to the listener, and it allows you to really see the growth of characters and plot in the show, giving the hype meaning. Now that's all well and good, but if you're told to write a piece of music that is going to get the listener excited, what exactly does that entail? Well, for me personally, I would generally think upbeat, big orchestra, lots of brass, fast strings, and a melody that invokes a feeling of grandeur in the listener. The hype variation in this group does all of those things, but takes it a step further by retaining the emotional melody, but merely augmenting it by using different underlying harmonic structure and some smart orchestration. This method is great in my opinion because it retains the purity of the original theme. Many composers when writing variations will alter a theme to keep it recognizable, but fall in line more with the emotion or style they're going to emulate. This is a great strategy, and I'm not bashing it at all. It takes a great set of skills to pull off well, and I can cover that in another video if you want, but Iwasaki decides to only make very minor changes, mainly in the underlying harmony, and mainly keeps the melody intact. This is a bold decision, because of the melody's tendency towards the emotional side, but Iwasaki takes this in stride and emulates the story behind Gurren Lagann, showing that hype can be emotional. Hype should have meaning. I think that's a big factor in what draws me personally to this particular set of pieces in this score so much. I've covered a bit about this in passing through this video so far, but I think it's time to fully dive into the differences between the pieces and what makes them evoke the emotions that they do. Since the stripped down version is the solo piano variation With Your XXX, I'll be using this to compare to the Pierce the Heavens variation, which is the more orchestrated one. I'll probably be avoiding the string ensemble version because of time and it being less of a stark contrast. The more fully orchestrated version has more moving parts and emulates a much different emotion from the other 2 pieces. That's my reasoning behind this decision. With that said, we need to talk about our bass and establish some notes about that before we can compare things to it. With Your XXX, also known as Omae no XXX, is a solo piano variation where the star of the show is the melody through and through. Accompaniment is very minimal, only ever adding enough to keep the piece moving. The most complex that the left hand gets is slowly arpeggiating chords that act as context to the main theme. Even the left hand gets less complex at the very end of the piece, only adding context with single notes. This causes the listener to hear the melody as slower and softer as there are less parts that act to keep the motion quick. This broken down style in the piano being played in a very expressive way, meaning much variation in dynamics and velocity, causes this variation to show off the melody in its purest form. With regards to the actual melody itself, it's a somewhat somber but hopeful melody, and it does this by constantly setting up dissonances, then resolving them soon after. Another way this piece invokes those feelings is by alternating from minor to major chords, but often adding in sevenths or other non-triad chord tones which make the tone of the chord more ambiguous. Because of this ambiguity, when a strong major chord comes up, it's much more striking to the listener. The major chord that frequently comes up is the 4 chord of the key, which is a subdominant. This particular chord is often seen as a lift-up chord, as it's not quite a 5 chord, which is a dominant, so it doesn't have that pull toward the root and has a tendency toward some other chords, which makes it sound like a setup chord and is what causes most of those feelings of hopefulness. Even when the root is played, it's made a bit more ambiguous by playing its second inversion, meaning that the chord isn't built on the normal triad, but starts on the 3rd of the chord instead. This makes the focus sound a bit more close to minor in this particular piece, which invokes some of those more somber feelings. Not to mention that the melody itself often focuses on riding within a minor third, which has a somber quality to it as well. So it's pretty clear that this melody is built for and has a tendency towards the more emotional. That's why the 2 more broken down variations have so much heart to them, but the melody isn't just sad. If you'll remember, there was another important aspect that I covered as well, which was invoking feelings of hope. That's what the more hype and more orchestrated version focuses on. Instead of making the somber and ambiguous sections the focus, Iwasaki is able to mold the melody into something more exciting by focusing on having less ambiguous harmonic structure and really leaning into those subdominants. Of course, that's not the only thing at play, as the orchestration plays a debatably more important role in adding excitement to With Your XXX Pierce the Heavens. The piece starts out with an epic introduction section that shows off the ensemble that will be present throughout. Quickly transitions into the main theme at about 22 seconds, and while the theme itself is still emotional, the quick electronic beat and harsh timpani hits, coupled with the energetic arpeggiating strings, adds so much life to the piece and gets your blood pumping. The main theme plays on top of this in the strings. The arpeggiating strings switch to a straight tone harmonic accompaniment joined now by the brass. This gives this section larger amounts of presence and body and gives the idea of building throughout the piece. After this, the brass joins the strings in the main theme toward the end before the theme is played again, now accompanied by everything the piece can throw at you, from the arpeggiating strings to the brass and the harmony and melody, but there's still room for building as we see by the changes in the accompaniment. Some instruments jump up an octave, an old trick to add energy, before going back to a relatively more broken down version of the accompaniment. This is incredibly important because all of these small changes in accompaniment and the like make it so that the repetition doesn't get stale. Iwasaki seems to make some small changes every iteration so that the listener doesn't get tired of hearing the same melody over and over again. Super intelligent writing on Iwasaki's part. The next section of note is another transition section that acts as a break from the main melody and builds up tension for a short period of time before getting resolved into the main melody once again. The melody repeats with slight variations until we arrive at the end of the piece, which is a large chord section that's actually a variation of the first transition section. This just resolves any tension left in the harmony. This effectively helps the listener to understand that everything is connected, but coming to an end. This piece drops off for a second before ending with 2 large timpani hits that close out the piece. This is some cool stuff, guys. Obviously, there's a lot more instrumentation going on than the solo piano piece, and that's going to create energy, but what I find so fascinating is that the focus is always on the main theme. Even the transition sections are merely used to build some tension so that there's a release of said tension when the theme returns. This helps the listener to stay attentive to the theme the entire time, because if it simply repeats throughout the piece without those building sections, then you start to take the melody for granted and start ignoring it. I would kick myself if I didn't bring up one thing that allows this piece to shine and bring the hype as much as it does. That factor being the mixing and mastering, which are done pristinely here. To keep the piece having motion and excitement, but maintaining that theme focus, the mixing is done to make the accompaniment somewhat quieter than whenever the main theme is played. As for EQ and instrumentation choice, the EQ is done in such a way so that everything stays mainly within its own sonic space. This allows for the drums to really shine along with all the other parts of the piece, but due to the mixing, they're never distracting. They only act as a means to keep the motion and to make the piece sound faster than it actually is. The main theme is actually pretty slow, but the fast strings and exciting percussion actually give it a somewhat artificial sense of quickness that is necessary for the piece to sound as hype as it ends up sounding. I've said this about 1,000,000 times now, but this lets Iwasaki keep the emotion and purity of the original theme without having to modify much, allowing for emotion and hype to exist on similar levels. I'm gonna be honest, I love this show for many reasons, but one big factor is its ability to couple incredibly hype sections with real deep emotion. This gives the show so much more meaning to me and pushes it beyond something that's fun but hollow. Iwasaki takes this idea and runs with it so incredibly well in the music, and I hope I was able to share some of my enthusiasm with you all today. Throughout the score, Iwasaki seems to be asking everyone, "Who the hell do you think I am?" And if you haven't already, you really should check out the score and give it a listen because it has so much to offer. I talked about one thing today, but it also does genre and style mixing impeccably, as well as using that and the emotion to aid in world building and storytelling. Iwasaki is an absolute master of his craft, and this score is an absolute treat. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. It took a little bit longer than I expected due to some personal issues, including some tech failure, not allowing me to actually do my job, which is composing, which was pretty stressful, and still haven't quite figured that out, but hopefully I will soon. I really enjoyed making this video. I absolutely love this score and this show. If you want me to do anything else on Gurren Lagann or anything, just let me know down in the comments. I read all of them, I respond to you guys, and I always like the discussion. It's really fun for me. If you want to stay up to date with my personal thoughts on current season stuff, scores, just random thoughts, you can follow my Twitter. The link will be down in the description. If you're new here for whatever reason and you enjoyed the video for also whatever reason, think about subscribing. It's just cool to me, honestly. Just growing the channel. It's just pretty chill. It's a lot of cool people. All the comments are usually filled with interesting stuff. If you couldn't tell, I really love this score and this show, so making this was a really fun thing for me. I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I hope you have a great day and a greater life, and I will see you in the next one.